Hey, what's up? It's GC Kinsey, and today I'm going to be breaking down the Emperor's New Clothes argument and talking about why it's harmful to trans people. So what exactly is the Emperor's New Clothes argument? I want to take a moment up front to define this term because it's not a widely used phrase within the trans community, but rather something I came up with after being on the receiving end of the following transphobic comment. You know the people who call you he don't actually see you as a he, right? They can tell you're really a woman. They're just humoring you, like all those people in the Emperor's New Clothes who were fawning over his outfits even though they could tell he was really naked. Yeah, wow. So when I talk about the Emperor's New Clothes argument, what I mean is this idea that no one actually sees trans people as our true genders, and instead they're only using our correct names and pronouns to be polite. There's a lot to unpack about that assumption, so I'm going to boil my thoughts down to 3 main points. Number 1, you can't tell someone is trans just by looking at them. The Emperor's New Clothes argument relies on the assumption that transness is always obvious, that your physical traits will give away your assigned gender at birth, and everyone around you will be able to tell what it was. But of course, that's not the case. Otherwise, you wouldn't have trans people who blend in seamlessly with their cis counterparts. And you wouldn't have incidences like cis women getting kicked out of women's bathrooms because someone thought they were trans. Side note, can we please just stop policing bathrooms already? Our perception of other people's genders is notoriously unreliable, and that's because not only do humans come in a vast array of body types and features, but also we have a wide variety of gender expressions. So not only is it impossible to accurately guess whether or not someone is trans just by looking, it's impossible to tell what someone's gender is, period. The problem is that our societal standards don't reflect the reality of all this diversity. Instead, we have a very narrow range of what is considered normal. So people think they can use certain features, things like voice, height, bone structure, jawline, hip-waist-shoulder ratio, fat distribution, hair growth patterns, and all kinds of other things to clock someone as trans. But when you do that, you're always going to get some false positives and some false negatives. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that there's never a time someone might guess that you're trans. I mean, that happens to me all the time, usually because people can perceive a discrepancy between my presentation and things like my voice or my body type. And they're not wrong, I am indeed trans. The point I'm making here is that transness is not always obvious, in spite of what the people making this Emperor's New Clothes argument would have you think. I tend to see this argument pop up the most when someone first comes out as trans, because when that happens, you're telling all the people in your life, hey, I know you thought I was this gender this whole time, but I'm actually this other gender. And when that happens, of course all the people around you are going to know you're trans because you just told them. To those people, your transness will be obvious. So then they start trying to convince you that your transness is going to be equally obvious to everyone else in society at large. No one will see you as your actual gender. They'll just offer up a polite veneer that they do by calling you what you want to be called. But that is just projection. Just because your family or your oldest friends and acquaintances will know what your assigned gender at birth was, doesn't mean everyone that you meet in the future will. And even if the new people you meet can tell you're trans, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't see you as your gender. Which brings me to my next point. Number 2, people can and do see trans folks as their true genders. A common theme I've seen in trans circles on social media is this fear that no one will ever see us for who we really are. For some people, that's even their greatest fear. I've seen so many posts that say things like, people don't treat me the same way that they treat the other girls they're friends with, and I'm afraid it's because they don't see me as a real woman. People who date me tell me I'm so much better than the cis guys they dated before, and I'm afraid it's because they don't see me as a real man. People struggle to gender me correctly, and I'm afraid it's because they think non-binary people aren't real. People keep calling me by my old name and pronouns, and I'm afraid it's because all they can see is the old me. If no one is ever going to see the real me, then why bother transitioning? And I really hate how this emperor's new clothes argument feeds directly into that fear. Especially because it's not even true. There are people out there who will see you as your actual gender. Yes, even if they know you're trans. Yes, even if you still have obvious characteristics of your assigned gender. Yes, even if you have not achieved all of your transition goals. In societies where the gender binary is considered important, we're taught how to see other people's genders from a very young age. But just like that gets drilled into us, it's possible to drill that back out of ourselves once we become aware that the gender binary isn't an accurate reflection of people's lived experiences. And once you learn to do that and practice it, it becomes a lot easier to actually see trans people as their true genders. How do I know? Well, I can speak from personal experience on both sides of the coin. I have friends who I know are trans because we've bonded over our shared trans experiences. And guess what? I still see those friends as their actual genders, even though I know their history, and even though that history can sometimes get personal. For example, I've talked about period dysphoria with other trans folks who also have a uterus, and I don't see them as women just because we've talked about that particular bodily function. I know that periods are not a gendered thing, they're just a uterus thing, and uteruses, just like any other body parts, are not gendered either. What's even better is that I have experienced all of this from the receiving end. So just like I have trans friends who I see as their true genders, I have friends who see me as my true gender as well. Yes, including cis friends. Do I also have friends who clearly struggle to gender me correctly? Yeah, of course. In fact, I would say I probably have more friends who struggle with it than ones who don't. But what's important is that they all try their best and they're all respectful and affirming, which brings me to my last point. Number 3. Even if people are just being polite about your gender, so what? Trust me, I understand wanting to be seen as your gender, not just called all the right things, but truly seen. And I know it can be frustrating and exhausting and hurtful to constantly hear people call you by the wrong pronouns or get treated in gendered ways that aren't right for you. But I also think there's a line in the sand where you can give other people a little too much control over your own happiness. And when you find yourself constantly worrying about how other people see you, not how they treat you to your face, but how they see you in their heads, that's where I think it crosses the line. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to feel hurt when people make it clear that they don't see you as your gender and they are just being polite. Of course that can hurt, and feeling hurt isn't generally something that's within our control. But what I don't want to see any other trans person do is avoid or give up on transitioning altogether just because of how other people might see you. Look at it this way. If you stay in the closet your whole life, no one will ever see you as your true gender. But if you come out and transition and live your truth, then at least there's a chance. So how can you get past those fears? How can you get to a point where all you care about is whether people call you the right name and pronouns and not why they do so? One of the biggest things that's helped me is repeating this mantra. What other people think of me is none of my business. I'm going to say that again. What other people think of me is none of my business. It can be really hard to adopt this way of thinking. As much as we all try to claim we don't care what other people think about us, we really do, right? I think at our core, most of us want other people to love and care about and respect us. But if you care so much that it's harming you and preventing you from living as your authentic self, that's when you've got to reframe things for the sake of your own well-being. So practice that. Repeat that mantra. Acknowledge and accept that you can't get inside anyone else's head and control how they see you. And you wouldn't want anyone else getting inside of your head, right? Everyone's thoughts are their own. And it's really people's actions, not their thoughts, that have the greatest impact on you. And that's exactly what you can say to anyone who tries to hit you with the emperor's new clothes argument. When they tell you no one's ever going to see you as your real gender, what are you going to tell them? That's right, say it with me. What other people think of me is none of my business. And that wraps up my deconstruction of the Emperor's New Clothes argument, so now I want to turn the conversation over to you. Have you ever been on the receiving end of this argument? Have you struggled with the knowledge that people might not see you as your true gender? Do you struggle to see trans people as their true genders? How do you cope with these kinds of struggles? Whatever your experiences are, whether you're trans or not, I would love to hear from you, so drop your thoughts in the comments and let's get a discussion going. If you want to reach out to me on any other social media, I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And if you want to check out any other videos while you're here, I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, as well as cosplay music videos and makeup tutorials. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you on the next one.